morning, everybody. It's so nice to see you and to be here with you today. Welcome to the New Power Players panel, where we're going to discuss how Gen Z and Millennial women are really poised for economic dominance and how really brands, properties, platforms can work towards maximizing their relationship with these women and ultimately serve them better. So my name is Thayer, Lavielle, and I'm super excited to introduce you to the panel today. Starting first is Shelley Pisarra, who works with me at Wasserman. She is our EVP of Global Insights and Strategy, and also is my co-lead on a new venture that we've started called the Collective Think Tank, and helped co-author this study around the new power players. I also want to introduce to you Jeremi Gorman, who is the Chief Business Officer at Snap, where she has been for several years, and before that ran ad sales and among other things at Amazon. So comes with a long background of marketing to these two age groups. And lastly, but not leastly, is Kayleigh Grieve, who leads UEFA's women's football marketing and sponsorship, and is also a 40 under 40 Leaders in Sport winner from last year. So hello to all of you. Very nice to see you. Thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, and just to kind of level set, the Collective Think Tank has recently published a paper really talking about the power and dominance of these two generations, Gen Z and Millennial women. And I wanted to just set the table with a couple of key findings and takeaways from our research, just to make sure everybody out there in viewer land can also understand how the perspective with which we're coming to this. So number one, these women are gaining in economic dominance. Not only are they responsible for $43 trillion of global spend in the world, in the US, they will also own 2/3 of the wealth in the next decade. They drive 85% of all household purchases and are essentially taking over the purchasing power within households across the Western world. Additionally, with more and more of the world being in political upheaval, they are more socially and politically engaged than ever before, certainly more so than their male counterparts. And note to brands, with 47% of all global citizens feeling very distrustful of their governments to make progress, huge opportunity for brands to step in and start to play a service role to consumers as they look for solutions really to driving their society forward. These women are so stressed out. They are inundated with information because they're natively digital. And so they are constantly inundated with noise and information, and oftentimes in multiple screens at once. And so with 88% of millennial women feeling so stressed out, it's no shock that they're then completely focused on mental health and really solving for self-care. And the conversation of mental health has taken a very open and public forum, thankfully, where it's less about feeling shameful about what your mental health is, but rather saying, hey, I'm overburdened and I need to really have some solutions served to me. And so for brands and properties, the more that you can serve them these solutions, the better off you will be. Our research has also found 5 key priorities for these consumers. Number one is, she wants stuff on demand. She expects you to meet her where she is, when she is, how she wants, all while kind of anticipating her needs. That probably feels pretty overwhelming, but we'll get to that. It's also on purpose, and I think Jeremi can certainly lend some data and insights on this as well from Snap's perspective, but she admires brands that combine not only utility of their service, but also with purpose. So brands that lead with purpose are able to show their superpower. So it also has to be for her. She wants to feel seen and understood for her individuality, but she also wants to insist on inclusivity from within brands, within organizations, and within communities. So it's this complex set of how do you start to win with this shifting consumer. And then for the better, she's constantly pursuing growth and learning and upskilling. It's a generation or 2 generations that have really learned how to lead their lives through YouTube tutorials, how to change their oil, how to create a better popsicle or a face mask, and also how to maybe get a certification online. So it's a very different set of requirements from these generations of us as leaders and as brand stewards. So with all of that being said, welcome, ladies, to this panel. So glad that you can be here today. I want to just dive in and really start to understand who these consumers are a little bit better. Purpose-driven, fiercely independent, totally devoted to their self-selected communities, which they may have many different ones within their lives. They're on the go. They're expecting brands to meet them where they are. Jeremi, from this white paper, how do you feel about some of this information that we've published, and what else can you help round out in terms of the stuff that Snap knows? Maybe tell us a little bit about who the Snapchat consumers really are, or platform users are, and how you're seeing them look at the world.
Yeah, absolutely. From the white paper, first and foremost, I was inspired as a woman myself, of course, to see this power generation coming up behind us. Not that far behind us, obviously, but just kidding. But they, it's really inspiring just to see how much power they're going to have, the percentage of them that are going to college relative to even my generation, which is just a generation ahead there. And it's been really amazing. So as you can imagine, at Snap, the parent company of Snapchat, we spend a lot of time focusing on Gen Z and millennials to kind of ground in the audience specifically. I'll give a US driven number, but you can extrapolate this more broadly. We have on the platform 90% of 13 to 25-year-olds in the United States on the Snapchat platform, or as we like to say, everybody who didn't get their phone taken away that day. But we're also not really as young as it seems. We have 75% of 13 to 34-year-olds in the United States. And they use this, they use the platform, and this is not meant to be something specifically about Snapchat. It's more just to give you some insight into what this generation does. They pick up the phone and use Snapchat 30 times a day. So that sounds like blow your mind. What are they doing for 30 minutes a day? But this is the insight, which is they are communicating with their friends. So it's really their kind of default text message. They're utilizing the camera in Snapchat. The app opens to the camera. And I'm sure you've all seen Gen Z take a million pictures of themselves. What they're doing isn't vanity. They aren't taking these beautiful pictures of themselves and perfect in this chat environment. What they're doing is expressing themselves via pictures. So the saying, a picture says 1,000 words is really what they're doing. So it's, I'm going to take a picture of myself with this coffee cup, and instead of telling you I'm having my morning coffee, it's just visual communication. To ground that in what the actual numbers are of how many people are talking with pictures, there are over 4 billion pictures taken in our camera every single day. So it's like kind of crazy when you think about that. And then lastly, they're consuming content. So it's effectively their text message, their camera, and their television, because they do consider their televisions to be their mobile devices in their pockets. They consume long form, short form, etc. That's what they're doing every day. So it's really exciting to see that. Thayer, to harken back to your point, they really believe in purpose. And so when we study this generation, which we of course do all of the time, just to make sure that we are staying in touch with our own audience, we realize that over 80% of them believe that it is their responsibility to change the world, which is really interesting and probably an indictment, frankly, on the generations before them. But to your point about them feeling like power players, they are truly taking it upon themselves. And that's one of the most exciting things we see.
Yeah, thanks. That's so insightful. I also think that we found that they demand these things of brands, not because they're being bratty or because they're being kind of gratuitous about it. It's rather, hey, I've got a lot to do here to get this world back on track. And so just come and meet me more than halfway, and we can go figure this out together. So those are some interesting stats there. Kayleigh, your role is pretty focused on the women's game of football around the world. How do you create programs of awareness and answer for inclusion, purpose, creating community, knowing that you're targeting not only fans that might enjoy women's football that might be older, but also from a participation perspective, some of these younger fans and participants coming up?
Yeah, so that's the key thing for us. We have those two key strands that you described. And on the participation side, we're probably in that Gen Z and actually younger. And one of the things that I think ties closest to some of the points that came out of your white paper are just around changing your product to what those girls or those women want and are, and representing them. So good example of that, we recently launched a Playmakers program. Now this is for 5 to 8-year-old girls, so we're going much further back in this journey. But I suppose what our realization has been is we see football in this certain way, and we deliver football in a certain way. And if girls want to come and play football traditionally, okay, we've been making opportunities for them for a while. but it's been kept in the same way that we've always delivered football. We've always shown football to be, and that's our perception of what our game is. And what we're learning more and more and more is that our game has to adapt to these girls. We need to celebrate what makes them special and how they have fun and what they enjoy from our game, and be comfortable enough with our product to adapt it to that, rather than try and force what we think it should be to their space. And that it's a new program. We've been working with Disney on that, so it's an active play and storytelling based program. But again, it just allows girls to be celebrated for who they are, rather than having to mold into something that the sport world says they have to be if they want to enjoy our product. And I think that's one of the things that came through even in your research, is to, you know, stop trying to tell women what they should be or what they want to be. And Jeremi, I find what you're saying fascinating. I have a 14-year-old daughter here at home who, you know, when I look at the difference between what she does on Snapchat versus what she might do on Instagram, it's just completely worlds apart. I think they are rebelling slightly on that filtered, here's where we are, this is what we want. In terms of our programs of inclusion and community, I think our biggest step has been not to be a brand who's producing content for this community, is to actually just facilitate them creating the content. So we have a number of professional female players essentially in our books who create our content for us. So our TikTok channel is just professional players creating TikToks and putting a football spin on them and having some fun with it. But we don't create the content, we give them some steer, but they do it for us. And we're working with a community or a world of women now who are comfortable with cameras, are comfortable creating their content. So why would we think we'd know how to do it better? So essentially we just try to create this platform and this community where we facilitate it and we promote it and we amplify it as best we can. But the majority of our content comes from the community, and they tell their own stories, they shoot it themselves, they all sometimes edit it themselves, and we just become the house that supports that. And in that way, it helps us kind of stay in that cool space, because, you know, as a mum of a 14-year-old, I find it hard to stay cool. It's not the easiest thing to keep up with, apparently, as I'm told frequently. But that's a way for us to take the pressure off ourselves of that as well, is just find a way of allowing our community to tell their own stories and amplify that as much as we can. The competition side is slightly different, because you mentioned there, with participation, it's very, very focused on young girls and young women, and we can be quite specific and targeted in that area. On the competition side, clearly we're not trying to grow global competitions like the Women's Champions League just for women to consume. It's a much broader package and there. So there's where we're having to be quite creative about how we now build campaigns and how content. And we have a big football audience who need introduced to the women's game, and they need kind of their perception changed, and they need to that kind of entry level information into being able to support it. Then we've got our super fans who know everything about it and want deeper engagement. So how we build campaigns is shifting. And I think over the next couple of years, that'll become more evident as our Women's Champions League reformats and the Women's Euro hits. Having to have those two quite different audiences, and even within those audiences, clearly they break down further. So the more and more deeper we look at this, the more content we have to create that's much more targeted at different audiences, which can be overwhelming. I think you used that word before, but at the same time can be really, really incredible when you get the response and you get it right and you put the right stuff in front of the right people. So
I think that's what we found also through the research, is that we as a brand and a property, you have to be able to really target her individually for who she is. But Shelley, I'm curious to know, you've spent a fair amount of your career also at brands within PepsiCo. And I'd love to understand from your perspective, what are these women asking of these brands? What are they really looking for from these brands? Because it's a bit different than a Gen X or a boomer.
Yeah, it is. But I think the fundamental principle that underlies all of it is she wants to be acknowledged and understood, and then have needs met based on that acknowledgement and understanding. You know, Kayleigh, you talk so great about their content in the community, helping to bring that content to life. And Jeremi, you're watching that happen each and every day on your platform. And I think the greatest service that brands can do right now for this generation of women, or these two generations of women, frankly, all women and consumers as a whole, is to listen and learn and pay attention. Because being a part of these conversations essentially requires some homework, right? So they want to be acknowledged, they want to be understood, but you also need to have a purpose to be in the conversation. So there, you know, as we were putting together the research for the white paper, purpose is a little bit twofold. There's purpose in meeting my values and beliefs and desire for a particular social construct for our society as a whole. But there's also purpose in terms of you need to be right and relevant and have a role in playing a part in that conversation. That's a really big challenge for brands, is to figure out, where do I jump in and participate or facilitate, either in exchange or put content into the world. You have to have a right and a purpose to be there. You can't come in and talk about something that you've never talked about in the past without any equity there. So not only understanding that target, but then figuring out, what's the role I currently play in the lives of my target. So whether you're Lay's potato chips or AT&T, you're going to have to understand how you're showing up and what these women are really expecting from you, so that you can come alongside. And I love the term facilitate. We talk a lot about that, is anticipate their needs and then facilitate the meeting of their needs. And that might not be about you as a brand, but it might be about an experience or a partnership that you can bring to them and have them experience. And you'll get the credit on the back end if you do it the right way. But that's how brands and the women can really come together, is understanding them and making sure that you're reaching them in a way that's with purpose and being relevant at that time, as well as, you know, meeting their social construct. So I find that the two ends of the spectrum here, in terms of, Jeremi, you have a great platform that is giving women their voices, and these young girls, and Kayleigh, watching how you guys are taking that knowledge and understanding and bringing it to life from a participation perspective and then from a content perspective. I find that fascinating, and being able to kind of share that information back and forth. You know, on from a marketing perspective, even now on the agency side, we spend a lot of time working with clients to figure out the right balance of content that's being put out there on behalf of the brand and or user generated content, and knowing the right way to curate what's coming in from the user, so that you're supporting and building on that broader message and that broader need that women want. And that too is a bit of a delicate balance. But once you can have them engaged and have women and these younger women feeling that they're being heard and acknowledged in that exchange, that can be a really powerful thing. So it's listen, understand, and then put yourself out there relative to the role that you should be playing with respect to your product, your service.
And not necessarily what you think, not necessarily what you think you should be playing, but really what they think you should be playing. Because there are plenty of examples of brands trying on the purpose hat that have not worked. They just want coffee or tires or whatever.
The authenticity piece is huge for this generation. It's like they see right through you in 2 seconds if you try to insert yourself in a conversation that you've either not participated in before, or isn't true to your brand, or has literally nothing to do with you. You know, so you look at a brand like Unilever, who I believe is doing it incredibly well, and they are very rooted in this kind of real beauty, and have been for a very, very long time. Procter & Gamble, very similarly, really rooted in women's rights, putting their money where their mouth is by writing the check for the women's national soccer team. And so when there are these issues about women, or something, you know, scary, sad, whatever it may be, like the death of a Supreme Court justice, for instance, and they want to speak about that, they have a right to do that because they've been doing it all along, which is very different than another brand coming in and talking about something they've never drawn a line in the sand on before.
Right.
You know, Jeremi, if I can just build on that for 1 second, I think that's a fantastic example. And over the past several months, obviously there's so much happening in the world with respect to social injustice, and you're watching this generation just take over and demand change and really not rest, right? And we obviously hope that continues. What's been very interesting is watching brands who haven't participated in the past take that step back and look at themselves as organizations and acknowledge, okay, we're not there yet. We have homework to do on the way we work, the way we show up, because we now understand that they are going to call us out and they are going to hold us accountable. And if we're actually going to have a role, frankly, moving forward, now we have to talk about the changes we need to make and slowly start to immerse. So it might not be that they've been associated with a particular cause in the past, but because they understand who their consumer is and the role that they play in their lives, they're now saying, all right, I actually have to do something bigger here. It's not about campaign. It's not about content. It's about the way we work, the way we show up, how we spend our dollars, potentially what we're putting into the world from a sustainability perspective. And that sort of pause, back up, retrench, restate. And now these women, to your point, they're going to hold you accountable. And it's the entire generation. Women obviously are leading it, but that has been absolutely fascinating too, because there is now that little gut check that is going to happen. Like, we have to make sure this is right and it's on point, because they're going to call us out in under a minute, no matter where this ends up. So.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And I think such a big part of that is how brands are engaging through content, because these women are just these generations, and really human beings on the planet are just engaging on a telephone. And so nobody more so than Gen Z and millennials. But what for women in particular, Jeremi, what types of content are you seeing that resonates most for these two generations that are really kind of pulling them forward? Is it just funny little bits and bobs? Is it really socially justice focused content? Is it a little bit of both? Is it just interactions between friends? And then I think the second part of that question, and it's a bit of a competitor question, is how do you guys then account for, the infatuation, I would call it, with TikTok of so many of these generations? Because I see my kids go back and forth all the time. They use Snapchat as if it is the main method of communication. And TikTok is another way for them to express themselves, is the way that I would put it. Just curious to see how you see it.
So I think I'll answer them in reverse. But I think one of the things that's interesting is how different the use cases for the two platforms are. And what you just described is what we see as well, is that Snapchat is sort of their home. So like, if you think of our generation, the things I use most on my phone are my iMessage and my camera, right? And in Snapchat, both of those things are there, like we talked about before. So that's kind of what they pick up first. Like, what did my friends say? What did they post? What's going on? But it's not as much of the, like, I just want to be entertained right now. So I guess the difference would sort of be like, I am deliberately watching this show versus I'm flipping channels, which is sort of the TikTok model. And they do it extremely well in terms of serving. Not only am I flipping channels, but I'm flipping channels in a way that's totally personalized to me. But I think what both platforms tell us is that there is sort of an immeasurable amount of content that they want created by their friends. So when we look at these pictures, for instance, that I mentioned, the over 4 billion that are taken daily, a lot of them have augmented reality on them, for instance. And it's not just the dog ears, it's augmented reality in any way. It's adding something to their world. It's, creating different memes, like this kind of thing. And it really is just, they want to create it for themselves, for their generation, for their friends, which is really interesting. I think the two platforms are really complementary in that way. And it really just shows, to my earlier point, is that they want to entertain themselves, right? They're not like, I can't wait for 8 o'clock when Family Ties comes on, in the way that we did. They're just like, I'm going to go do this. And when we're talking here about 6, 7, 8 hours a day on the phone. So while people do tend to refer to us as sort of competitive with one another because we're interacting with the same generation, the reality is there's so many hours in the day that these people are on their phones that certainly more than enough attention to go around. So I think that's really interesting. And then when I look at kind of what they're doing on the phone, it really is this, and Kayleigh, you mentioned this as well, is it's sort of this escape to authenticity. So it's a little bit less about the filters and the perfection and the, like, I need to take 100 of these pictures to post the one thing that will last on my timeline forever. When you're talking about ephemeral messaging like we have, it's actually a waste of time to take the perfect picture because it will be gone tomorrow. And so it's really just like, how are you taking that in the moment? And we also look at like everything else they're engaging with. So an example would be in gaming. So young people are really into gaming. They genuinely believe that esports is a sport the way that, for us feels like wait a minute, I was playing Super Mario Brothers, but for them, it's just as integral to their lives as football and the NBA and the MLB. But think how shocking it must be for them that they're playing a game like Fortnite and they're playing it with their friends. They're connected to their friends. They hear and feel, they have all of the audio, they're part of the game, and then they turn that off and go watch something like a baseball game, and they're not involved at all. Like, they can't hear the athletes talking. It's a totally passive experience. So I think what we'll see is sort of this intersection of that, where ultimately sports and associated brands will need to get into this. Like, these people want mics on the players. Over 40% of US Snapchatters want mics on the players, because that's what they're used to, because that's what happens in gaming. And I think brands have an awesome space to play in there too, to like talk to them directly. But I don't think they'll run out of content to create all these. It's just every day, it's totally different. You can see it walking down the street, like little girls being like, like, they're doing like TikToks without even thinking about it, which is really interesting.
Yes,
So
to the
funny you
point
say
where
that.
I have to tell
Jeremi.
my daughter to stop dancing. I'm like,
On another thread to that, I also coach youth football, and it's one of the things that we're finding as coaches is that kids don't watch football. They don't watch it, so they don't know as much about the game tactically as kids used to when they were younger, because it's just not interesting to them anymore. It's just like, even my daughter, who plays football 5 times a week, she's obsessed by it, and in an experiential level, but sit down and watch a game of football with me, not interested. But it's got quite a big impact on our sport when you try to coach kids, and that's how we're used to them learning from that experience and watching and learning, bringing that into practice, and then you build on that. So away from the marketing side, even in a practical sense, it's got a big impact into how we're behaving.
So Kayleigh, to that end, how much do you, understanding that you have a lot of young girls that are looking to participate and a lot of just general worldwide fans across the world, particularly with the increase of eyeballs with women's soccer or football across the world with the latest World Cup and coming back up hopefully on an Olympics next year. How much do you leverage your superstars for engagement? How much are you going out into your markets and saying, this is important for us to really highlight and leverage their influence and their networks in order to continue to educate girls on soccer, but also to bring more fans to the game?
Massively. I mean, I touched on it slightly before, on the basis that we've not only do we feature the pro athletes in our content, but they actually create most of it for us, which is very, very different than maybe on the men's side of the game and the way that we approach it, but it just far more authentic, far more entertaining. It allows us to get into that more deeper, longer form content as well, and I think that's where our brands have found that really interesting, that we, most of our brands could go to any of your platforms and buy, media at decent rates and advertise their brand and create content. So what do we offer as a sponsorship there, and how do they integrate with us? Well, actually, we've got quite good attention spans through the content that we create, because the girls shown behind the scenes, they're vlogging, they're creating content that does grab the attention for longer than a few seconds here and there. And I don't think we could do that with the more traditional point and shoot type content. I think that only comes from being immersed in their worlds through their point of view and through their lens. So that's building us quite an interesting, even commercial model for our partners and how they can engage with that type of storytelling. But no, the players are central to it. They're central to it from the content production, but also from a distribution perspective. I think we more and more use our athletes as influencers, and we distribute our campaigns and our content through them on social media. But rather than going directly always to the platforms, we will go through our athletes as well, because they are influencers. And we've got many girls in the game who maybe not all, it's quite an interesting dynamic. You can have the really top stars who have a big following on social media because in Europe, potentially they play for Barcelona and they've got the big Nike deal and they've got more exposure. But it doesn't mean that on social media that they're the most engaging or entertaining person. It's just a personality thing sometimes. But you can get other players in the game who maybe are still professional, but maybe not the top stars, who are just super engaging on social media. And we try and work in amongst those players as well. So even from a distribution of our media spend, not all of it goes that way. Of course, we spend with the platforms as well, but it's allowing us to almost circulate more of our budgets and things into the game, into the players, grow their profiles at the same time and support their journey and incentivize them to grow their own brands and to be personalities and show that they can, you know, the women's game's clearly not as lucrative individually for each of the players as men's sport and men's football is in Europe. So giving them other ways to be involved, support the game, and also from their own perspective build their own revenue streams is quite an interesting dynamic as well as we grow the players. But they are, when we see women's football, and the key kind of engagement triggers for most people, it is around the sense of togetherness and community. Why do girls play football? It's togetherness, it's community. But even when we've looked at our data with our men's football audience who take an interest in women's football, where in men's football their engagement trigger might be tribalism or, you know, national team pride or whatever it may be, that same person, when they engage with women's football, it's still the community that's the trigger for them. They enjoy that part of the game, so it helps us identify. And within any community, you need key people and key figures who are the entertainment within that and are driving that, and that's who often our players are. And then linking that back into even the chat we were having before about our purposefulness or activism. You've seen it in many, not least in the States, how much more willing female footballers are to be activists, to use their platform, even though their platform might not be as big. They see their position as one of opportunity to get good messages out there, and they're very articulate and they're well educated, and you know, it creates a really safe and interesting community and discussion. And we just try and, yeah, as we said before, like shape what we do around that. And sometimes that means even as a governing body, it can be quite controversial, can you say, to allow, you know, players to have their own voice on our platforms, because at the end of the day they could be saying things that go against maybe decisions we've made or the way that the game's been governed. But we have to be quite brave, I think, in opening up those channels of conversation and allowing that type of content to go out there associated to us and be open to that. So yeah, the players are absolutely key to that, and it will continue to be going forward.
That's great. And just one question, Jeremi, before we get to a rapid fire round here. How does Snapchat globally support the sports ecosystem? And like, how should brands get involved? Because you guys, as you stated earlier, you guys own a lot of the communication between these generations globally. So how can brands interact and get engaged, and properties obviously as well, to be, to your point, less passive, more engaged, more engaging for these incredibly powerful consumers who are coming up?
Yeah, really good question. So we engage in a lot of different ways. I think one of the things that's most interesting is that we, of course, because at our core, this is the generation to whom we speak, we take the concepts that have already been really well proven. So something like SportsCenter is a really good example, where ESPN does an incredible job of producing that program and making a huge brand worldwide. And they have two choices when they want to do distribution on a platform like ours or anybody else's. They could take their 30-minute episode and they could cut it to highlights, and they could put it on our platform as 6 minutes, which is kind of the attention span we're working with here. Or they could do a totally different program where the anchors are younger, excuse me, where they're focusing on the kinds of players that do have this big social media presence, and not necessarily the biggest stars, right? They may not be watching Tom Brady in the way that we would watch Tom Brady, but they are definitely interested in the 22-year-old player who's maybe up and coming but has this great personality on social, on our platform and others. And then I think the way, so we have, and SportsCenter does that. So they do this totally different cut of SportsCenter that runs on Snapchat in our what's called Discover section, which is sort of the content side of our app. And it performs extremely well. And I think that's really smart. I think brands should consider doing a lot of the same, which is not just I've done my TV commercial and I'm going to reduce it to 6 seconds for these platforms that take 6-second ads, but like, what am I actually going to say to this generation? How am I going to feature a person that they can resonate with or care about? But the specifics of what they're doing on the platform, and I think maybe this will help brands kind of just think through, how do I involve myself in this conversation, is that they are, in particular as it pertains to sports, but generally speaking, is what they're doing is they're sharing messages and video of their own reactions during the game that they're watching. So 68% of people who are using Snapchat during a game are doing that, which is like, you know, you'll see Messi score a goal and they're like, oh, but they are filming themselves reacting to the goal, assuming that there's a co-viewing experience with their friends, which is really different than like wait till the end, get the highlight show later. In addition, as they're watching sports, they're sending direct messages to one another, one-to-one, to their family, to other fans, to their friends. Over 60% of people are doing that. And then we see a new kind of burgeoning trend where there's a lot of group discussion and co-viewing, where people are using Snapchat and or any other platform to kind of communicate with each other and say, turn the game on at this time, even if it's delayed viewing, so that they can do that shared behavior. And I think there's just a lot of opportunity for brands to participate in that, insofar as the inverse used to be true. It used to be like, how do I get in this highlight reel? But now it's, how do I get in like right now as this game is happening? So we see a lot of that kind of behavior. And then mostly it's just, they really enjoy doing things with their friends, and they view their friends as their biggest influencers. And when they look at athletes and they feel like they are their friends, which is very different than like a kind of perfect image of the sports stars we used to see, then they're more likely to follow them. So previously, and I believe this is in some of your research as well, you'd see people start to follow a league, then you'd see people start to follow a team, and then you'd see people start to follow an athlete. And now the inverse is true. So like, you might not even have a favorite football team, but you certainly have a favorite footballer. And then over time, because you like that person, it becomes your favorite team. And then you're like, you know what, I'm kind of into this league. So I think that's an interesting inversion.
That's amazing. Incredible insights, you guys. I really appreciate your time today. I'm just going to end it with one quick word. If I say Gen Z and millennial women, what is the one word you would say? I would start with dynamic. Jeremi?
Badass.
Good. We'll take it as one. We'll take it as one.
Bad hyphen ass. Yeah.
Kayleigh?
Take myself off mute there. Yeah, powerful.
Powerful. Shelley?
Yeah. Ready.
Oh, that's a good one too. Well, thank you guys so much for joining us today. Great discussion. I hope that this has been helpful for all of the viewers out there in Leaders Week. And we look forward to hearing from all of you guys soon, and hopefully engaging with you even sooner. Thank you.
Thank you for having us. This was great.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.